Hello, I'm Stuart Preston, and this is the Stoned Ape Reports, where I have conversations with those who have changed their lives with the power of psychedelics. Quick announcement, I now have a book out titled The Grief Trip, How I Learned to Heal with Grief and Psychedelics. You can find it at www.thegrieftrip.com. 100% of proceeds go to the Ian Preston Memorial Fund to help support mental health and suicide prevention. Okay, back to the podcast. In this episode, I had the honor of speaking with Robert Villa, who currently presides over the Tucson Herpetological Society, assists with ongoing developments at the Desert Laboratory on Tumamac Hill with the University of Arizona, and is a member of the Next Gen Sonoran Desert Researchers. He also consulted with Hamilton Morris on Morris's 2 episodes of Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia about the Sonoran Desert Toad and 5-MeO-DMT. The result of those episodes is an updated version of the famous pamphlet Bufo alivarius, the psychedelic toad of the Sonoran Desert, which includes information on synthetic 5-MeO-DMT, a great step to help preserve these amazing animals. So let's hear from Robert. Well, Robert, thank you so much for joining me here on the Stoned Ape Reports. Like we talked about, this is a different kind of an interview. Normally, I interview what I call other stoned apes, people who have had transformational experiences with psychedelics, but I've seen your presentations about the Sonoran Desert Toad, and with 5-MeO right now kind of blowing up along with the popularity of psychedelics in general, I think it's important that the message I heard you deliver at these events, that, you know, I take my little platform here and give it an opportunity to put it out there. So first of all, thank you for your time coming on here and doing this, but maybe we could just start with kind of some background on the Sonoran Desert Toad, you know, what it is and what the current status of it is.
Sure. Well, again, thank you for having me on your platform. I do appreciate it. I appreciate any amount of time that that I can have to sort of talk about this issue. So the Sonoran Desert Toad is an amphibian. It's the largest toad in the Southwest. And its range parallels the Sonoran Desert, and so that's from the southern half of Arizona, more or less, through the entire state of Sonora and into a tiny bit of northern Sinaloa. It was first collected near the turn of the century at Fort Yuma on the Colorado River. And this is how it got its first common name, the Colorado River toad. And yeah, it's incredible to just because it's a desert amphibian, you know, it's sort of like an oxymoron. Amphibian is like a fish, really, in its water environments. So the fact that you have amphibians that have adapted to living in a desert is quite remarkable. It's as Sonoran as a saguaro or a Gila monster. That is, they're emblematic of the Sonoran Desert. It's one of the characteristic species of the Sonoran Desert. Its ancestors and the closest living relatives of the Sonoran Desert Toad are a tropical group of toads called Incilius. So everything about the toad is kind of remarkable for many reasons, aside from its psychedelic qualities, which we really don't understand why this toad is the only vertebrate that produces high concentrations of nearly pure 5-MeO-DMT. I've talked to a lot of people or knowledgeable people, and there really hasn't been any work to understand how this toad produces the substance. So that kind of already sets the stage in a sense, for the popularity and the mysticism around the toad.
Because some people may take that as like it's almost this divine creation for us.
Yes, yeah, that's right. So yeah, and forgive me if I'm getting way ahead here, but one of the factors that also set the stage more than what I just said um, is there was a paper by two rather well-known scientists, Andrew Weil and Wade Davis. They published two papers in 1994. They're almost the same, pretty much the same article. They were published in two different journals. And it was the articles were the first to formally describe and report on the psychedelic qualities of the Sonoran Desert Toad in an academic setting.
Right.
And in that paper, they postulated they guessed, without any anthropological evidence, that indigenous people were likely to have experimented with smoking a variety of substances, including the Sonoran Desert Toad or toads. And I really think that might have gone a long way into the fabrication and the notion that smoking Sonoran Desert Toad toxins or secretions is an ancient indigenous practice. And it's not. There's no evidence for it, at least. Toads have been regarded as miraculous beings to indigenous people for a whole variety of reasons, except for being psychedelic.
Yeah, and that's interesting because even before I saw your presentation, I had the question about the indigenous use of these toxins, and I came across Andrew Weil's paper, and I took that as evidence. Now, this guy obviously has dropped a few bombs on the psychedelic world himself, right? He's kind of a toxin himself. But I thought, here I am reading a paper by this very well-regarded, professor, and it's mentioned that indigenous effect. And then I saw your presentation, and you made a really great case where you showed the slides of images of toads on, the indigenous cultures in, southern Mexico, Central America, those regions, I think it was.
Yeah. Yes.
And some other things there where you kind of laid it out. It's like, you see, these are other toads. These are not the Sonoran Desert toads. And there's really no evidence or recording of anybody using these in any kind of a ceremonial fashion or at all.
Yeah. And superficially, there are, if you didn't really probe too deeply, you could see like the incense burning vessels and the toad-shaped pipes, tobacco pipes, and things like that. Those, might allude to smoking Sonoran Desert Toad secretions. And there's just a lot of material, existing facts and materials to superimpose onto a narrative that a lot of people want to believe. And I think, as you're probably very well aware, in our society, we are grasping very much for a sense of communion and spirituality and ritual that maybe was never there or has been slowly leached out over time. And because of the nature of psychedelics, that that psychedelics provide fertile ground for the creation of a spirituality and ritual and lifestyle and such.
Yeah.
But as you know as well, I'm sure, there are a lot of things that we have to take into account when we want to make progress, and when we want to lead better lives. We have to see how that impacts other living things, humans and non-humans.
Yeah.
Are we benefiting at the cost of another being, at the expense of another living thing, for which there is no cultural context or ancient context? So this is kind of the in my work with this whole issue. The whole linchpin has been converging science and cultural narrative, traditional knowledge and science, in this case, really need to be stakeholders at the same table. And that table is human well-being and toad well-being, environmental well-being. It's the reconciliation of hard science and traditional science, indigenous science.
Yeah.
And that is mindfulness. All of that is being mindful.
Yeah. And so are these, I love the way you put that it's the living being that we need to be respectful of, that is this toad. Is it, and I know that the government or government agencies only look at, endangered species every, I don't know, 5-10 years. So it's really not up to date, but I have this sense living here in the Sonoran Desert region, I feel like the last few years, the monsoons have been really dry.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been a lot of building out into these areas. And so I'm kind of concerned. Has there been any official, like you and your teams, have you noticed?
Well, yeah.
Toads?
So my other hat, as it were, is I am a research associate at the Desert Laboratory on Tumamac Hill, which is a sacred indigenous hill, land feature. But the large part of the arc of that lab's history is understanding the climate of the past through a bunch of clever methods. But when you look at those deep data sets, and you look at the recent climate history, there is increasing unpredictability and intensity of our climate. And the monsoons are becoming less frequent, or we're going more years where we're having less rain, but every once in a while we get very intense monsoons. So it's just kind of unpredictable. We are in a long-term drought. Especially this year is a La Nina oscillation, so it's predicted to be a dry summer cycle. But the future will be characterized by infrequent, very intense monsoons. So you just basically have sort of a borderline personality climate regime, and the fluctuations are just gonna be much more intense.
Yeah. And these toads really depend on the monsoon season, don't they?
That's correct. The toads, well, amphibians in the Sonoran Desert have adapted to emerge, eat, reproduce, and in the case of a tadpole, turn into a small toad or frog in the span of within the monsoon season, which in a drying pool could be between 8 and 10 days. But the Sonoran Desert Toad, because it is more tropical in origin, it relies on more permanent bodies of water or areas that stay humid most of the year. They can also go, they also go dormant in dry patches. The point I'm trying to make is that they are tough creatures, but the dryness is pushing every desert adapted creature and plant to its limit. Its adaptations are being exercised to their limits, and so the toads have already faced all the other challenges, such as the climate, human expansion, disease, and all of these things on top of the psychedelic demand. So they're resilient creatures, but not for something which has just appeared within the last millisecond of their existence on Earth.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what is it? I think the last several 100 million years of evolution never prepared them for stoned apes with opposable thumbs.
Right. Yeah, and so speaking of us stoned apes, is there any humane, ethical way for humans to acquire this poison from the toads, or is any interaction with the toads essentially damaging?
Well, that's a great question. The most humane, ethical way to collect the parotid secretions or poison from the toad is through toads that have been killed on the road.
Roadkill. Yeah, that makes sense. Roadkill.
Yeah. So that's the first option, and other than that, if the toad is being manipulated by or handled by people, the toad is offering you the secretions, but as a defensive mechanism. So this is a response to what the toad perceives as a predator or an attack. And even just picking up the toad doesn't elicit the expression of those glands. So what I'm saying is it takes a lot of stress and harassment and fright to get this toad to release these secretions on its own. And also, but most people, right now, the way what's going on now is toes are picked up and the glands are squeezed and the secretion is collected. And I mean, physically, the toad is fine. The toad is, it has evolved that adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the question is now is a moral one on our part. Whether you're an individual person going out and doing this, collecting toads for this purpose, or a toad for your own personal purpose, or whether you're supporting or participating in a mass uh, collection of this substance in Mexico is,
Mm-hmm.
those are moral questions that you have to ask yourself. So yeah, that's my job, and my attempt right now is to stem the demand with reality, and something I spent a lot of time thinking about. I was a consultant to Hamilton Morris on the first episode of his show in 2008, 17, I think
Mm-hmm.
it aired. And that was a huge undertaking, because I worked very hard to ensure that cultural myths were dispelled, and that everything that was produced was factual and ethical,
Mm-hmm.
or was just factual. And it was, generally it was, but the popularity of that show sort of eclipsed the narrative in a way. And so right then after, my good friend Pat Foley, who runs Cream Design and Print here in Tucson, who had always been fascinated in underground culture and publishing and things like that, and designing, we got together and produced the first conservation design or campaign. And the proceeds go to the Tucson Herpetological Society, where I'm the president, and they go into our Sonoran Desert Toad Fund, which is specifically to research and conserve the Sonoran Desert Toad throughout its range. And so
Nice.
we're just about to release the request for proposals to that fund. And as we speak, anyways, there's already been a group, a multidisciplinary group in Sonora, who want to understand the status of the toad in Sonora. So yeah, getting back to the conservation fund, or the fundraising efforts, later on, Hamilton decided to make a second episode about the Sonoran Desert Toad, in which he explains who the actual author of the pamphlet, the 1984 pamphlet, of that described how to extract this from toads and smoke the secretion, identifies the actual person who authored it under the pseudonym Albert Most. And in this episode, he also speaks to the World Bufo Alvarius Conference that's held every year in Mexico City, and is explaining to these people that, or to the attendees, that we need to leave these toads alone. they're at a great risk. Anytime an animal is perceived or even does have some sort of benefit to humans in a big way, it usually marks the end for that species. And he's trying to promote a synthetic a synthetic source of 5-MeO-DMT in order to leave these toads alone. So what ended up resulting from that is that he, after interviewing Ken Nelson, the author of Bufo, the psychedelic toad of the Sonoran Desert, understanding how he became the first person ever to smoke this substance, and why he published the pamphlet. They both decided that they would update the pamphlet with a conservation forward and a section in the back that outlines the laboratory synthesis of 5-MeO-DMT. They would sell this new edition, and proceeds would go to, I think the vast majority of proceeds went to the Michael J. Fox Parkinson's Disease Foundation, because Ken Nelson died of Parkinson's very shortly after the interview and the episode aired.
Yeah.
Another chunk of proceeds went to or are going to Gail Patterson, the original artist of that pamphlet, whose illustrations are in that pamphlet, and because the artwork from that book had been used for a lot of T-shirts and things like that.
Yeah.
So, and then lastly, another amount of proceeds goes to the Sonoran Desert Toad Conservation Fund, or Sonoran Desert Toad Fund. And so between Cream's proceeds and Hamilton's proceeds, we're roughly in the ballpark of $9,000 to $10,000 in the fund. We're still waiting. The depositing of that money takes time because it has to go through a bunch of legal channels and such.
Yeah. That's a good show. It shows that people are buying these, and their money is there. That's good.
So and the pamphlet has also comes with a nifty bookmark that basically just says "Leave Toads Alone," which is becoming a nice hashtag and motto on the internet. So we're really happy about that. So
it's awesome. I've got one in my hand here.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And I will put a link to it so other people can go there and purchase this book and get that really cool design bookmark.
Yeah. So Cream Design and Print is sort of facilitated Hamilton's publication of the pamphlet, and I had, I've been in contact with Hamilton because of our we're sort of wanting to make sure that this is done right, correctly. But when Hamilton needed a publisher, I immediately recommended Cream here in Tucson. Cream's printer and designer, one of them is a guy named Maxwell, who is incredibly advanced for his young age and mature. And early on, Max called me, and because people had been asking him about the ethics of publishing this pamphlet. And I agreed that, the intent could be lost in publishing this historic documents, even if there is a new forward and a new laboratory synthesis in the back. So after about 2 hours of talking, we decided, well, let's just stick a bookmark in there that cuts to the chase with the message of just leave toads alone, or please leave toads alone.
Perfect. I think that hit the nail right on the head.
Yeah, and the wonderful thing is that as soon as people started sharing their purchase on Instagram, the bookmark was showing up right next to the pamphlet in like 90% of the posts.
Nice.
So that was really a relief and satisfying to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's excellent. And I did see the second episode, well, both episodes of the Pharmacopoeia, and I saw when he was at that conference in Mexico, and he said, "Hey, look how great the synthetic is." There's a lot of skepticism,
yeah,
and a lot of turning away from it. What has your experience been in terms of feedback, or what has his been? What is the general feeling about synthetic versus from the toad?
well, Hamilton really characterizes the issue pretty well, even when he's addressing the crowd, and that is that Hamilton did an analysis of his own of the secretions, and it turns out that the secretion is almost pure 5-MeO-DMT with a negligible, like an insignificant amount of bufotenin in there, which bufotenin is a mild psychedelic. It's found in a number of other places, including us humans, but it's called bufotenin because it was first discovered in toads. But it's found in Anadenanthera, which is the seed. It's the seeds of a tropical tree, which are pulverized into a snuff. But what I'm getting at is that it's impossible to say that the toad-derived substance is superior or inferior to any other source because it's practically pure. And so the experiences that people have are completely subjective and impossible to quantify.
Yeah.
So, and the experiences are going to be different every time. The experiences are going to be unique, even repeatedly within the same person. So, yes, and also if people are taking this substance with other psychedelics, then that's going to have an effect as well. So it's all I should say metaphysical, and the toad can remain the avatar of the movement or of the community, but we should leave toads alone. The toad can be a mascot or a symbol of 5-MeO-DMT. I mean, it is, but we can remove the physical toad from the equation.
It's like a gift it gave us.
Yeah.
It said, here you go. This is what this is. It can be the avatar to represent that, but the synthetic, like you said, is pure, and what comes out of the toad is almost completely pure. So it really is the same thing. It's just the mystical aspect of it, and we can just superimpose that mysticism from the avatar of the toad onto the synthetic and drive on. Then we can leave the toads alone.
Yeah, and psychedelics are incredibly promising tools, and I have to say that I am not against them at all. We just need to be mindful and in everything that we do in general. And it's very difficult to research even a qualified chemist or scientist or therapist. It's very difficult to, at least in an official setting, in a officially sanctioned setting, scientifically and governmentally, it's very difficult. So we have a number of legal impediments that have delayed our development in psychedelics. I mean, it's changing for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And something that almost needs to be recreated outside of the framework, legal framework. New frameworks have to be created. That's happening.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, like you said,
the
moral
point is,
and ethical.
we're just so nascent right now.
Yeah.
In the whole process.
Yeah, mindful, moral, and ethical.
Yeah.
I like that. Is it Bufo alivarius or Incilius alivarius?
It's either one. For the purposes of the psychedelic world, you could call it Bufo alivarius. It's very popular, and it's but Incilius is a taxonomic technicality. It's geneticists and taxonomists have just refined the classification of toads, and our toad happens to be nested within the Incilius group of toads, and almost all toads at one point were Bufo, but that's taxonomy is always changing, so it doesn't matter unless you're a taxonomist.
Okay. All right. And then the last thing was just to ask you if there's anything else you wanted to get out there, because that's all I had to ask.
Oh, well, let me think here. Yeah, no, it's been really great talking to you, and I appreciate again being able to talk about this, and let's just all be a little bit more mindful of how we use our psychedelics and where they come from, and the impacts that we have when we do them, and how we source them.
Absolutely.
So
that's beautiful. Well, I am so grateful for your time. That's great information. Exactly what I was hoping to get out there. So, Robert, thanks again for your time and sharing your expertise. It really means a lot to me and to the community.
You're most welcome.
That concludes this edition of the Stoned Ape Reports. Thank you for listening. Please follow us on Instagram at Stoned Ape Comedy and subscribe to our newsletter at www.stonedapecomedy.com. Again, thanks for listening, and catch you next time, Stoned Apes.